All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
Oh, thank you, everyone. Still a couple of people left over from the meetup last night. What a fun time we had. It was pretty terrific. Tony was there running it all. And thank you again, Tony, for clocking in with time and a half.
Thanks, Tony.
And and being part of things. You did really keep it moving, and it's hard when you're in the midst of conversation to see people coming and going, and you kept track of all that. Kim also very helpful.
How are you?
And very fun that Kim stayed for the whole thing as well. We had a lot of really I'll say just kind of fixtures of the show join, you know what I mean? People who've been with us since KGO Radio, who'd come over to YouTube and take us in through Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We obviously exist both on YouTube and on these other platforms as an audio podcast. Every day it's posted, and many people listen to us that way. But however you make us a part of your life, we so appreciate it. And then so much fun to interact and to actually get to know all of you who are part of this community. So thank you all for being with us last night. Today, I've really got a terrific show. In the first hour, Ray Madoff joins, and Ray is a brilliant professor of law and taxes at Boston College and has a new book. And you're going to love, first of all, she's new to the show, and you're going to love her that way. But also you're going to love this subject matter, which really deals with how the wealthiest Americans skate on taxes and how the tax code is set up to completely protect them, how that happened, and sort of the way in which we are living another Gilded Age. But it's very different in some ways than the Gilded Age that we know about. You know, the Gilded Age informed by the robber barons of the early 1900s, that kind of thing, 1900s America, and how we got the tax code we got. That was actually pretty good, meaning it actually, in American economic history, the 30s through the 70s maybe actually was pretty effective in doing two things. And I'll wait till Professor Madoff gets here to talk about this more. But the 30s to the 70s, you got money coming into government coffers that came from the richest Americans. And those monies permitted a support and a lifting up of a middle class that was robust. And you had it through those many decades, those post-World War II decades. There was a thriving middle class in America. And then after the 70s, things began to change, and the tax code began to change. And the view toward how taxes would be implemented and employed and deployed changed. And that's where we began this cascading second Gilded Age. And I'll have Professor Madoff describe more, but really cool that Ray Madoff will be here in the first hour, I think bottom of this hour. And in the second hour, David Cay Johnston. We'll talk about the boat strike, the Hegseth pressure that grows. It seems clear two things. One is he is not someone who is at all respected at the Pentagon. The military, I'll just use the word, I don't know that he's hated because I don't really have any, prima facie evidence of that. I have deductive evidence of that. I mean, and that brings me to my point. You don't get leaks of the sort that we're seeing around this boat strike incident and accusations that clearly point to war crimes that will be laid at the feet of Pete Hegseth if you had the allegiance, you had the faith, and you had the respect of the military. He doesn't. He has none of those things. He is a pretty boy who is shallow, but is filled with the rhetoric of kissing up to the emperor. And so the emperor has installed him there and will doggedly defend him until the end. And so Pete Hegseth, who is, he's a prop, and he views everything else as a prop. The theater of the Pentagon, the theater of the military, moving warships, assembling admirals and generals for a giant, well-advertised TED Talk about how they get lack of exercise to the point that we have an overweight Admiral Corps. It's absurd. And the absurdity and disorganization and lawlessness of this administration was and is on full display. But remember, this was a leak from the military. Someone in the military thought, wow, this is not legal, what we're doing. And we need to tell a journalist. You'll remember something else about the Pentagon and Pete Hegseth. They have barred journalists from the Pentagon who don't agree to sign that pledge, an oath that stipulates they won't come forward with anything in a published report that isn't cleared first through Hegseth's office. So that means that this report, which came through the Washington Post and described this war crime, it didn't come from journalists inside the Pentagon, because the Washington Post reporters and the ABC reporters and the CBS reporters and the New York Times reporters, none of them would sign that ridiculous pledge. And so this came through someone in the Pentagon who leaked this because it was so lawless and criminal in the judgment of whoever leaked it. And again, it speaks to a general reflection of disrespect and alarm that Hegseth has engendered in those who work in the Pentagon and in and around the military. And then the second point is, this is a war crime. If this is true, it's a war crime. We'll talk more about it with David Cay Johnston, but that's the state of the state with Pete Hegseth.
War crimes are charged by the International Court in The Hague, right? You can't be pardoned for that.
I don't think you can't, it wouldn't be federally prosecuted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, right. It's not a pardonable offense that way.
Although I suppose you could be court-martialed for something, but if, I don't know how it works.
I think he'd be removed, in disgrace or whatever, but I don't know. Yeah, we can ask David that as well. Best wishes to all from Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. Come on.
Hi, Glenn.
Are you kidding? Glenn B., welcome. Very, very cool. Always very exotic to get people in internationally. And a lot of love for Glenn in Australia. They are blaming an Admiral Bradley for the first boat bombing. Hegseth is trying to slither away from this. It's exactly right, and we'll get into this in greater detail, I think, with David. But it is true that, now tracking this down, they're saying, actually, Hegseth gave the order to completely destroy the boat and to kill them all, is the quote. And the admiral then was the ranking officer to say, go back and take out those survivors so we will then conform with the order we were given from Hegseth. That's the story that I've seen most recently. Now, I think there's an effort to skate away from it even more if you're Hegseth, to say it was the admiral. I mean, we'll see how much and how far they throw this admiral under the bus, but they might say, hey, the admiral went rogue. I never said kill everybody. We'll see. I mean, it wouldn't at all surprise me if that was their strategy. Thank you, MTS team, for hosting such a wonderful, fun gathering last night. This is from Luis. Great to see and chat with everyone. It really was super fun. Thank you, Luis. Was, one of those party guests who was really good at keeping the conversation going and had some questions, and even, I think, the suggestion to end the meetup with a toast, among other things. We ended with a meetup to a toast, the memory of Jim Avila. That was from Luis. So thank you, my friend. Really a great contributor to the conversation last night and to the show generally. You're a great supporter. Hollywood Cowgirl, you had me at hoedown. Yeah, it was a fun one. We'll do another one soon, I hope. It was great fun at the meetup. I had so much fun, said Dillette. Dillette has some credibility glasses going. I didn't even mention it last night, but she has some very cool glasses. She had kind of those Oyer lawyer glasses going last night. Have you seen Liz Oyer's glasses? She's kind of got, I liked them, really liked them. By the way, Oyer lawyer is going to be with us, I think, this week.
Good.
Liz Oyer is coming up.
She's been on all the national shows recently.
Yeah, I mean, she was on 60 Minutes. Yeah, she's really a rock star. It's true. And Dad fought for Australia in World War II, says Glenn B., with American soldiers. I'm glad he isn't alive anymore, so he doesn't have to see how far the USA has sunk. Yeah, it's a pretty weird look for the U.S., always representing freedom and liberty, always representing reaching out to those oppressed populations to free them from tyranny and despotism. Now you can see America arguably sliding into a tyranny itself. The Admiral and Hegseth are responsible. If Hegseth gave the orders, F them all, or, kill them all. And if the Admiral did not refuse those orders. This is an interesting part. And again, I want to talk more about this with David Cay Johnston. It is an interesting part, and kind of Kim hints at it, like where along the chain of command do you have to push back? And, if you didn't push back, are you then culpable on some level? So we'll talk to David about that. There's a big story. If I can digress for a moment, it's a total digression. So and again, I'm going to get to more on Hegseth. I've got Mark Kelly that I want to show. I think Mark Kelly, who should send Donald Trump a thank you note and a Christmas gift for becoming the target of Trump's ire. Please don't misunderstand me. Turning the federal government and the Justice Department and the Pentagon on Mark Kelly is its own brand of ruthlessness and despicable policy that is very much reflected in what Trump and this administration does. And it's all bad. But in terms of raising the political profile and creating a monster in Mark Kelly, a political monster that may haunt you, Donald Trump, you have done that. And for that, Mark Kelly can send him a thank you note. So I'll get to that as well. Also, Trump's MRI. We'll talk about the Trump accounts, these new ways in which you can become a millionaire by the time you're 27. Yeah. All of that's coming up. And as I say, Professor Ray Madoff, bottom of the hour. But first, I wanted to...
The Mark Thompson Show.
I wanted to digress and share with you a story out of San Francisco. This is amazing to me. The celebrated award-winning, Academy Award-winning director, Hall of Fame director Francis Ford Coppola. There was a story out of San Francisco today, and apparently, he is busted out because of his latest movie. Kim McAllister, who is in the Bay Area, will tell us more. Kim.
In 1972, Francis Ford Coppola, on the success of The Godfather, bought this building in the city, in San Francisco. And it's an historic, beautiful old building. It's known as Columbus Tower. It's this green building. I remember thinking how gorgeous this building was. It's right across the street from a fancy shopping mall where there's a Nordstrom cafe on the top floor, and it overlooks this building. And this building just stands out. It's so beautiful.
So isn't this in North Beach, the
It
Triangle building?
is. Yeah, it
okay.
is.
So
Mhm.
it's also across from the
Mhm.
Carol Doda Theater for years. It was the
Yeah.
it's there and adjacent to Chinatown, right?
It's called
Yeah.
Columbus Tower,
Mhm.
and he put it up as collateral when he made Copperopolis, and that movie flopped. And so now it
I think
looks
it was
like
called
this.
Megalopolis. Is
Oh,
that what it was?
Megalopolis. Sorry, I
Yeah,
said
yeah,
Copperopolis because
yeah.
Coppola. Yes, Megalopolis, and it was a $120 million uh, nest egg that he poured into this movie, Megalopolis, and the movie flopped and didn't do very well. And this building was put up as collateral, and so now it looks like he's going to lose it. Going to lose it.
So he put that up as collateral, you're saying, to get the loan and
Mhm.
get the money and financing for the film. And then
Yeah,
when that fell through, he
yeah.
now loses the collateral
He
because
says
he's unable to repay the loan.
his quote is, "I don't have any money because I invested all the money that I borrowed to make Megalopolis. It's basically gone. I think it'll come back over 15 or 20 years, but I don't have it now. I need to get some money to keep the ship afloat." What he said.
Well,
He's
it's Giving
86.
Tuesday if you want to give to a former billionaire who has a winery and somehow can't make ends meet. I mean, you've got your...
What?
Yeah, I'm just saying, it is there for you. Megalopolis is unavailable for streaming, says Cousin Erie. I don't know. I didn't see Megalopolis, and apparently not a lot of other people did either, which is why it didn't do so well.
He sold last month a private island in Belize as well for 1.8 million.
When you have to sell your private islands
That's a problem.
and you have to give up your... I mean, that is it's a rough Christmas season, you know?
Who is having that conversation?
I'm saying...
He apparently
you-
also has to sell several high-end watches that he'll be auctioning off this month.
When you have to sell your high-end watches, your island, and your building to make
Yeah.
ends meet,
Someone did this to spoil our Christmas.
yeah, it's really, really rough. Francis Ford Coppola, who is a fixture of the San Francisco Bay Area, a misstep late in his, apparently, in his creative career. So there you go. Never sell your private island, says Zero Sum. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe is that one of the basic laws of finance? Whatever you do. Anyway, that's the the Zoetrope offices were in that building. Exactly. I mean, it was North Beach, a thriving part of San Francisco. I used to love that building. It's near the
It's beautiful.
oh, what's their city? Is it City Books? That's right there in the same building. Well, is that Coppola's private island? Yeah.
Yes.
Very,
And
very
only $1
impressive.
million? I mean, $2 million? That's
1.8.
surprisingly affordable.
Yeah.
For you, maybe, Tony. You know, they're living large. But you're right. As private islands go, that seems like it's priced to move. You know. But all right, we continue. Yeah.
The Mark Thompson Show.
I am super excited to welcome our guest, a professor at Boston College. Ray Madoff is a ninja when it comes to the tax code, tax policy, tax history, estate planning, how the system's being gamed in all of these different ways. Her new book is The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy. And I have to say, the evolution of the tax code and our disposition toward the wealthy class, and even the way in which they present themselves, is a fascinating ride, and she takes you through it in her latest book. How about it for Professor Ray Madoff? How are you?
Good. Better now that I've been called the ninja.
You
Very
are
exciting.
a ninja. You're amazing. It's funny. I'll tell you something in secret, which is just between us kids.
Yeah.
I thought, boy, if I'd had a professor like Ray Madoff in college, I would have enjoyed it so much more. College just seemed like such a slug to me, you know. I just love the way you present material, and and the way you break things down. And so I want to get right into it because my time is a bit limited with you. But, this is really a time, it feels, of the second Gilded Age. But you point to the first Gilded Age and an age of conspicuous consumption that was very much about the Gilded Age. And then you point to the stealth wealth of this age, how the wealthy class, and you can give us a kind of point us to magnetic north on what the wealthy class really is in your mind, but how they present differently now, and that's not by accident.
Right. It's funny when you look at it. One of the reasons, so if you look at the history of taxation and modern taxation in the United States, so much of it is tied to the Gilded Age and the time where the country, for the very first time, saw these people with enormous amounts of wealth that really caused people to question the future of the United States, which had always been based on principles of equality and ideas that, that there is no special royalty or anything. And it very much in counter to that. And yet, in this period, people were living in these wildly extravagant ways. They were handing out the parties where there were cigars wrapped in $100 bills. I mean, really, Bezos' wedding notwithstanding, very much just like crazy high-end living. And people were looking at it with alarm, and they were saying, like, this is not what it means to be Americans. And of course, it was a time of conspicuous consumption. So they would have these elaborate parties, and they had glass walls so that the public could actually see what they were doing. This was a big part of being rich. And we know what it got them, right? Shortly after, we had pretty serious taxes were brought in. Of course, there were other factors in play at the time, which we can talk about, but our current rich are so different, right? You have Elon Musk on Joe Rogan, smoking pot and just being a regular guy, and all those tech people and just T-shirts and back in the day, hoodies, exactly. Right. And from tiaras and top hats to Sperry's and T-shirts, it's just been a tremendous transformation. Not, of course, that they're not living their lavish lifestyles, but typically it's being done in a more discreet manner. And you see all these people. You have like Warren Buffett with his frayed ties and things like that. That's much more. We're just like you is kind of the message.
Well, I love that you mentioned Warren Buffett too, because one of the ways you distinguish, I think, this wealthy class is by people who live off of the money they've accumulated, however they've accumulated it. They might have inherited it, whatever. That's a big part of, I think, this wealthy class. But because taxes on those who work for a living can actually be pretty high. Yeah. But those who just have wealth and actually don't work, they don't have an income per se,
right.
They're not faced with a tax exposure like that.
Right. That's right. They can choose to have taxes, but it's their choice. And it's sort of like, do you want French fries or a salad? And so whereas for anybody who has to work for a living, whether for themselves or for others, they are hit with, and we are hit with, pretty significant taxes, hidden taxes, as well as very aware taxes, right? We have income taxes and payroll taxes on top of it. And they can be quite burdensome, particularly for people with low and middle income who get no break on their payroll taxes. And payroll taxes can be as much as 15.3% for people who are self-employed. This can make a big difference in whether somebody can even pay their rent or keep their car up or maybe even put food on the table. So we have these
spend it because you do in your writings, the payroll tax is really hits the middle class hard.
Yeah. The payroll tax is interesting because it's a tax that many people are confused by. Even I was confused by it. You'd see it shows up on your pay stub, this FICA and FUTA. They call them contributions, making them think that they're voluntary rather than something. And they make it seem like it's your money that's being held for you, when in fact, payroll taxes are just like any other tax. They're an involuntary contribution to pay for a current government expense. And the current government expense is are the retirement benefits for current retirees. And so this is very much a tax like any other, but it's really hidden. And another way that it's hidden is that for people who are employed by others, the employer pays half the taxes, right? So now it looks like 7.65%. But economists generally agree that that money would otherwise belong to the employee in terms of higher salaries. So again, it's another way that these are very hidden taxes, and they are the second largest source of revenue for the federal government, right after income taxes. So they're really very significant. But one of my favorite lines making reference to this was from the old show Friends, where Rachel, you might remember, gets her first job and she gets her first paycheck. And she says, "Who's FICA and why do you take all my money?" And I think a lot of people feel that way.
And that tax code to which you've referred, that evolved, as you're saying, out of the Gilded Age, out of that conspicuous consumption. And there was a time, I was saying this before you arrived, that the tax code was working for the middle class. I mean, there was a robust middle class, and there was really a robust tax system that taxed those who were making the most and getting the most out of the economy. And I always say, there's nothing wrong with being rich. We're all trying to be rich, but I just think that rich people should pay their fair share of a system that has given them so much. And so it was for a while through the decades.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I think that's what has made it, created so much confusion about whether the wealthy pay taxes or not, because the system that was created in the early part of the 20th century, and has really persisted to this day, is a system that was designed to impose its greatest burdens on those who had the most, right? We had a progressive income tax, which means that people who earn more pay more. And we had an additional estate tax, right? Which made sure it kind of was a backstop to the income tax, and it made sure that gifts and inheritances were captured at typically previously at rates that were quite significant, even if those high rates weren't always paid. Sometimes people focus on the fact that our rates have come down to say that's the problem and we should be raising rates. I really don't agree with that at all. I don't think that one needs to return to high rates. And in addition, rates wouldn't solve the problem, because the transformation that has occurred is that the system has remained the same, but the wealthiest Americans have figured out how to remove themselves from the income tax system and the estate tax system. And what's interesting is they haven't done it through ways that people might think. Like, yes, I'm sure there's lots of offshore things going on, right? But what I talk about in this book is the way the very basic rules of our tax code impose significant burdens on working Americans. And for the wealthiest Americans, it's an entirely optional experience.
Again, there'll be a link to this book, The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy. We'll link to it under this video. But I wanted to just, and I know you can only summarize it in a super kind of ultra summary, but you described then this change, this the way that the wealthy, as you just said, sort of figured out a loophole. Give us a little something on that.
Yeah. So there's basically the way the rich avoid income taxes is through what I call the tax avoidance playbook. And for people who are getting excited and thinking, oh, good, I want to avoid taxes too, I have the sad news to report, which is that if you're somebody who relies on a salary or compensation for your work, like, these tools aren't available to you. And that's why that's because the very first step of the tax avoidance playbook is to avoid salaries. And all of our richest Americans, for the most part, we have Elon Musk is a little bit of an outlier on that, right? He's taking his $1 trillion salary, whatever it is, if he can get it. But you look at Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, Larry Ellison, all these guys, they are taking tiny salaries. The highest paid is Warren Buffett, who's never taken a combined salary and bonus of higher than $100,000. And
I mean, that's just incredible to me. And he's the most sort of, you think, like the most altruistic of the crew that you just mentioned.
Yes. He's like, why aren't I paying more taxes? Because you're not taking a salary and you don't issue dividends. We got the answer for you. And so anyway, so the first thing is avoid salary. The second thing that they do is they rely instead on the growing value of their assets. And for all these people who have stock that's grown tremendous, I mean, the amount it's grown just since 2023, the wealth that has grown so for somebody like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, literally over $100 billion just in the past year and a half, an extraordinary amount of money. But what they do is they have this growing wealth and they don't sell it, because if they were to sell it, they would have to pay capital gains. So instead, they hold on to it and they simply borrow against it to support their lifestyle. And Larry Ellison, I heard you talking about islands before. Larry Ellison, of course, has bought the island of Lanai, all with borrowed funds. Everything he's done with borrowed funds. And he's kind of famous, longtime borrower. And all these guys do, because they don't want to give up ownership of this stock that's been going up so much. They want to maintain control, and they don't have to. The problem is that under our current American system, this can just keep going, because they can avoid paying taxes. Then they can pass it on to their kids. Their kids can avoid paying taxes. And really, you can go pretty far down the road with no one ever paying taxes. That's why we should be having the rule that they have in Canada that basically says whenever somebody transfers stock, whether by sale, gift, or at death, tally the gains on that person. And that, by the way, was proposed by both an odd pairing, Barack Obama and Richard Nixon. I bet you haven't heard those two together on a single policy.
You've written extensively on this estate tax or death tax, and the way legacy money continues to build this schism between the haves and the have-nots. Give us a second on that, if you would.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we think of it, I'm sure some of your listeners are thinking, yeah, but there's an estate tax. There's a big 40% estate tax. And as we've all come to think of it, it's not just an estate tax, which sounds like something that's rarefied and applies to a few people. It's a death tax. It's an immoral death tax that hurts family farms and businesses. And the reason we think of it that way, for those who do, is because of a campaign that was funded by 18 of the country's richest families in 1990. And this campaign was basically to delegitimate the estate tax to such an extent that we got its repeal. And you might remember that George W. Bush ran on repealing the death tax. And this was a central platform for the Republicans for years and years and years. But you'll note, this past year, we had a Republican proposed, totally Republican-dominated bill. No mention of the death tax, no mention of repealing it, right? Why not? I think it's because they have achieved something better than repeal, which is that the tax has become so eaten out from within. It is basically a not walking corpse. It is doing nothing but providing cover for the richest Americans. And just to give you a sense, the richest 1% of Americans who this group the tax is supposed to apply to in 2024 had $50 trillion. Okay. Now, they weren't giving away all of it there or dying all of it, but, a significant amount. I can tell you, as someone who teaches in this field, a lot of gifting happens by the wealthy. The tax, 40% tax that was supposed to apply to all those transfers, raised $30 billion. That is 0.06%. Okay, less, and it's because it doesn't raise any money. And so the estate tax is now working for rich people because it provides them cover without imposing any burden.
How does that work, though, Ray? How do they get limbo under that? Yeah, exactly.
You know what? Come take my estate and gift tax class, and you'll see.
I would love to, actually.
It's like slats and slants and grats and grots and Q-perts and Q-tips and intentionally defective grantor trust, right? All of those cutesy names that you might hear if you ever read the financial pages about wealth management. And all of those are these tools that have been developed over the past 35 years. While Congress has done nothing to close, they have not closed a single loophole since 1990 when this campaign was put in place.
It's remarkable. And I want to get to this new Trump proposal, which is associated with kind of like a Social Security substitute that has his name on it. I'll get to it in just a second. I just would like a quick take on it. But you've written about something else, which I always felt sort of was a sad part of American society, and that's the philanthropy that we depend on rich people to provide. In other words, I always feel as though if our society has sunk to the point that we need Bill Gates to step up in a big way, then that's a problem. Can you speak up? That's another way in which these very wealthy people and the wealthy class can sort of wash their money in philanthropy.
Yeah. So first of all, the important starting point is that if you or I wanted to eliminate our tax liability by giving away our entire salaries, we could give away our entire salaries, but we couldn't eliminate our tax liability. And that's because there's no charitable offset for payroll taxes, right, which we already talked about, impose a significant burden. And there's a cap on how much you can deduct based on a theory that everybody should chip in their fair share, right? Charity's good, but you also owe money to government. For the wealthy, however, these rules don't apply. And that's because, as we talked about, they don't have income, so income taxes are not so much their problem. But what they have are capital gains and estate and gift taxes, and those have unlimited, no cap for charitable giving. And that provides tax benefits of about 60% of when you put the two together. And if you add income tax benefits, it's 74%. That means that when somebody gives $100 million, the rest of us are supporting that gift with up to like $74 million. Tremendous public contribution. But what are the wealthy doing with this? Are they giving it to food banks and all these fundamental programs? A significant portion of the money is instead going to their own family foundations and donor advised funds. And the problem is that, again, Congress has not kept up the rules with these. The reason Congress provided charitable tax benefits was to get money to charities, organizations actually doing the work. But for a variety of reasons, we now have a situation where more and more money, I believe 40% of contributions are going into private foundations and donor advised funds. And those are just two names for, think of it just as a donor-controlled wallet for charitable spending. The problem is, under current law, there's no requirement at all for that money to ever be spent. And that's because donor advised funds have no payout rules. Private foundations have a 5% payout rule, but you can meet it by giving to a donor advised fund. So, like, for example, just to go back to Warren Buffett, I don't mean to pick on him, but he's giving $150 billion to his kids' family foundation. And all they have to do is first of all, is to make distributions to their own donor advised fund. Nothing has to ever come out. And this is, of course, costing all the rest of us a lot of money because it's enabling those who have the greatest capacity to pay to be just not paying taxes.
So, but just to be clear about that, all the little Warren Buffett offspring who work for the foundation, are they drawing salaries? Is it another way just to redistribute the money under cover of charity?
Well, they do. They probably don't need the salary, so I wouldn't say that that's a big problem with the Buffett. What's interesting is that with smaller private foundations, right? Let's say somebody sets up a private foundation with a mere, $10 million, and it has to spend $500,000 a year. It can fully meet its payout requirement by paying kids' salaries and travel expenses for their annual meeting in, luxurious locale of your choice.
Right. All right. In our last few moments, I wonder if you could give us sort of your wish list of priorities for tax system reform, and then also what you think is sort of most realizable, what actually could happen.
Okay. So first of all, number one on my wish list is that your listeners understand that they can understand taxes, right? They can understand it by reading my book. They can understand it by reading articles, other things. But I would say particularly my book, because the goal of the book was to educate the public that, like, these are easy to understand things and you are being duped by a lot of stuff. So I think that a key to transformation occurring is for the public to be armed with information so they are not victims of disinformation, like Mitt Romney's 47% of takers, not makers, and things like that. And after that, we have, I think, some very simple proposals. One is get rid of the estate tax, which both Republicans and Democrats should want to do, right? Republicans claim they've been wanting to get rid of it. But we need to then realize that when somebody inherits $100 million, this should not be a non-event for that person for tax purposes. They should be required to report that on their income. Maybe we could even say everyone could inherit $1 million tax-free, and after that, pay income taxes on it. I think that's something that would really feel fair and appropriate to Americans, that particularly given the fact that when a regular American finds $100 on the street, they have to report that income. At least they're supposed to. So
also, that feels like a political winner. I mean,
it seems like exactly.
Yeah.
It makes sense to the public, and then the second is that these gains should be subject to tax. Again, the Nixon-Obama rule, adopted in Canada for many years, that gains should be taxed whenever the person disposes of the property. And that way you can, you can make sure that it's not a forever giveaway for the growing wealth to be free of tax. And then finally, of course, we have to reform philanthropy to make sure that dollars that receive charitable tax benefits actually make their way to charity.
And of those, it sounds to me like the estate is most doable because it's politically probably the most viable.
Well, the estate, I think that honestly, I actually have quite, I think that both the taxing gains at some point and repealing the estate tax and replacing it with an income tax, basically simplifying, those can all come in under tax simplification. And I think that they are definitely politically viable. I think that they are an easier sell than things like wealth taxes, which I think have all sorts of reasons for complexity, including their constitutionality. I just think that they're not going to be the way to go. And I think what's good about a system like this is that we're not saying billionaires are bad people, right? Because there is a division in the country about whether billionaires are bad people or good people. And we don't have to have that fight. It's simply just enough to say that people with wealth should be paying income taxes too. That strikes me as a pretty obvious statement. And
it speaks to a fairness, or at least a presumed fairness, to an American system, which is associated with sort of this aspirational quality of wanting to be part of the wealthy class, but owning the responsibility, which seems to have kind of melted away through the decades. And
also avoiding this sort of class warfare argument that some people like to say, this has nothing to do with class warfare. This has to do with just bringing everyone into the tent,
Sure, fairness, right.
Yeah.
The book is, again, The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy. There'll be a link to get the book under this video. You just click it and you can have it. Yeah. And wow, what a pleasure to talk to you, Ray Madoff. I really wanted to for so long. And so for me, this is really a cool day. And I hope you'll come back and visit again.
Anytime. A pleasure talking with you, Mark. Thank you so much.
Okay. All the best.
Okay,
Ray Madoff,
bye-bye.
everyone. So long.
The Mark Thompson Show.
How great is Ray Madoff? Just terrific. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. David Cay Johnston, yes, has spoken at some length about some of that. So you can see overlap there. We could pay off the federal debt, says Thomas Little, with wealth taxes, which would have a huge benefit, 30% total wealth the first year. That, I mean, there's no question that, the wealthy class is skating on so much, and we are enduring a withering debt. And there are so many ways in which the wealthy class, which is, I think, Professor Madoff's argument, can equally participate in the tax burden that we all share.
Well, we're all going to be millionaires by the age of 29 now, right? Because we now have the Trump account.
Yes,
so everything's going to be fine.
What an interesting and yet at the same time not completely surprising move that Trump has made to put himself into I think it's the Social Security argument. Isn't that what it is, Kim? It's sort of his version of kind of a retirement account, is it not?
It's kind of what it seems like, although there is no mention of Social Security, but it is an investment vehicle for young people where if the government will put in a little bit, and this is for an American child born after December 31st of 2024. And before January 1st of 2029, for whom a Trump account is established, they say, gets $1,000 from the government. And then your parents or your family can put in up to $5,000 a year. And supposedly, by the time you're 28, if the maximum contributions are made, you'll have $1,091,000.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And I'm sorry. And how does that happen?
Through the magic of the stock market. I don't know. But it seems to me that if you start something like this, and then I mean, is it in addition to Social Security? Maybe. But maybe it's the first step toward privatizing investments through the government. And
well,
I don't know.
As I've said before, they've been wanting to privatize Social Security for some time. George Bush, the younger George Bush, took a really good shot at it, and it didn't get there. It is messing with Social Security is always thought of as the third rail of American politics. But beyond that, you see in this not messing with Social Security, but sort of creating your own other game, which is what Trump is proposing here, I guess. There has to be with Trump some kind of unholy transactional aspect to this, I would say. And so this idea that you contribute before age 18 on a continuing basis up to $5,000 a year, as Kim was saying, and then employers make an annual contribution, and there are fewer employers because of what's happening in the American economy, as you know, with robotics. I mentioned to you the Amazon layoffs are massive. The Target layoffs are massive. You can just go through company by company. I mean, there's a sadness as I look back at this year in the way of mergers and acquisitions and the way that private equity has stripped out so many businesses, that everything from Forever 21 to Denny's has been destroyed by private equity. And so you see all of this in a constricting American economy from the standpoint of ownership, and yet you have this suggestion. So anyway, these employers, again, there are fewer and fewer of them, make an annual contribution of up to $5,000. And I'm sorry, $2,500 the employers, $5,000 is the amount that you could supercharge your child's fund with. So that's $7,500 a year. And under a scenario of average returns of the U.S. stock market, as Kim has said, the Trump account balance for a baby born in 2026 would be over $300,000 by the age of 18 and over $1 million by the age of 28. Now, that presumes a lot of stuff. It presumes a stock market growth, of course. It also is creating this other encumbrance in the American government that Trump just doesn't have the power to create, which is this matching fund, right? This idea somehow that you're going to contribute $5,000 and then we, the government, we're going to give $1,000 to everybody who's part of this, and employers are going to contribute $2,500. I mean, where is all of this happening? You're going to compel iHeartRadio to contribute $2,500 to Tony's kids' account. I mean, there is a part of this that is just dreamland. But we can talk to David Cay Johnston about it when he arrives. I just don't see it as I see it as a headline grabber more than anything else. Speaking of headline grabbers, I want to quickly get into, and I'm going to get into David Cay Johnston with the story about Hegseth and the double tap strike. I want to get into that with David in a big way. So, here he is now. So we'll ask you to smash the like button in the world of YouTube if you're watching. It helps us with
your iron rod.
Is David unable to hear me? This is something that is now. I have a new modem.
Wow.
I'm all new. I've got a new modem, new T-shirt from the Mark Merch account, getmarkmerch.com, Project 1984.5, which I think reflects the disinformation from Big Brother. And I'm drinking from my Project 1984.5 mug with the tasteful logo of our show on the backside.
You're very matchy-matchy.
I am matchy-matchy today, and thank you for noticing.
Girl, you just woo.
I do feel just woo today, as a matter of fact. And I do want to mention, I'm going to see them later today. This is the Coachella Valley coffee I'm drinking. Coachella Valley coffee,
So
sourced
good.
from women-owned businesses, that they seed those women-owned businesses quite literally with monies to allow them to seed the ground and grow coffee and teas and spices. All those coffees, teas, and spices then populate CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. You can buy their coffee, their teas, their spices. It is the best you will ever taste. And it is a fresh, new crop. It's not stuff that's been sitting around for a long time. That stuff is discounted across the internet. This is a boutique roastery, hand-roasted coffee. And again, grab it at CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. Use our discount code MARKT at checkout for more. And somehow I lost David Cay Johnston. Is he there?
He
or
couldn't
not?
hear you.
I told
so
him
he
to drop
dropped
out and come back.
Come
I
back
see.
and
Okay.
see if he
Any
can
better,
hear you.
David? Can you? Yes, I love it. All right.
Right on.
All right. Now, so without any further delay, although delaying is fun sometimes, isn't it? But let's get into it.
The Mark Thompson Show.
He's a Pulitzer Prize winner, best-selling author, co-creator of DCReport.org. He's the public intellectual that everyone wants to hear from, and that's not an exaggeration. I see David now everywhere, international broadcasts, domestic broadcasts, all the rest. And he, of course, is a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology. He's the brilliant David Cay Johnston, everyone.
Hello, Mark. Thank you.
Hello. Yes, sir. I want to ask you first about this. I'm going to get into Russia-Ukraine in a big way with you in a moment.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you about this Hegseth thing, which seems to have really blown up, if you'll pardon the expression, in politically as a problem that they're trying to sort of tiptoe out of. And Hegseth wasn't he in the cabinet meeting this morning, which of course is televised because that's the way Trump does everything. He spoke on this, and Tony, do you have a little bit of Hegseth speaking to the Supreme Leader at the cabinet meeting? This is him sort of giving the state of the state. This might be. Is this the? Let's listen to a minute and see if this is the right cut. Here we go.
And you'll tell us about some of the achievements, and some of you have achievements that are so big, I don't want you to go through the whole thing because we're not done. But we'll start with Pete, and then if you want, we'll take some questions at the end. Please, Pete.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. As you said, it has been a historic year at the Department of War. Recruiting and retention over this year are at the most historic levels our country has ever seen. I had a chance to be on an aircraft carrier destroyer over Thanksgiving. The spirit in our ranks since the election under President Trump is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it as a soldier myself in uniform, and I know a lot of you feel the same way. We've ripped out the DEI and the political correctness. It's all merit-based at the department. We're getting back to basics: accountability, training, readiness, lethality, and that's reviving that spirit. And Mr. President, we're rebuilding the military, historic investments. I just took briefings on the Golden Dome and F-47, next generation capabilities that are going to make sure that for generations to come, America has the most powerful, most capable, most lethal military in the world, which you have rebuilt
I've
once
seen enough.
and
First of all, you want to talk about a waste of money. That F-47 or that and the Golden Dome, David. These are Pentagon programs that are just monuments to waste. And then he just speaks lethality. He uses words like that, and it's just I find it all performative. But to the point, Hegseth's in trouble, isn't he?
Hegseth is in a great deal of trouble, and I find it hard to believe, though I do not have any specific facts, that troop morale is at the highest levels ever. And part of the reason is one of the things going on very clearly since the Washington Post broke the story, and the White House confirmed the story, however surprising that is, that Pete Hegseth issued the order, kill them all. And they went back to the two survivors of the first boat strike, we've just learned, and killed them. You rescue people when you shoot. If you had an enemy, and Venezuela is not our enemy, and you shoot their boat out, you go rescue the people who are in the water, and then you take them as prisoners of war. You don't kill them. And they're trying to now lay all the blame for this on an admiral. That's not going to go down well with the boys in uniform. That's not being stand up. And our military is certainly taught, especially at the officer corps level, about being stand-up. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't things that go wrong. There are junior officers, who get court-martialed or pushed out of the service because of some effort to protect somebody further up the ranks. That happens. It shouldn't happen. But this is of a whole different order. This is civilians undertaking actions that are clearly illegal and then trying to lay it off on an officer who's the intermediary. And it goes to the heart of the recommendation by Mark Kelly, who may well be the next president of the United States, thanks to all of this, that you do not just follow orders. Hegseth was a captain. I mean, it's not a high rank, lieutenant captain, but he was a captain, and that he doesn't grasp this, or he doesn't care, which I think is the much more likely explanation. It doesn't logically flow from that the troops would be thrilled. And that's what he's trying to sell.
By the way, just as an aside, I made the point to start the show that Mark Kelly should send Donald Trump a Christmas gift and thank you note for the making him the target. Making him the target of DOJ and Pentagon is a horrible thing. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, you're right. His political profile has been raised on a level that it just could not happen overnight any other way.
And Mark, should the Justice Department charge Kelly and the other 5 Democrats? I think that will really blow up in their face because of 2 things. One is what they did in that public service announcement that I'm assuming everybody watching has seen is simply state the law as it is and as is taught to every military officer and indeed civilian officers. And secondly, it's hard to imagine that any court would uphold this because it's not a crime. Oh, and there's a third reason. There's what's called the speech and debate clause in the Constitution. A member of Congress can walk onto the floor and say any outrageous thing in the world, and they may not be held accountable for it anywhere else, kind of like the Supreme Court giving Donald a free pass in 2023 by saying a president cannot, after he leaves office, be prosecuted for any official act, which is totally contradictory to the Constitution, makes it eminently clear if you are impeached and convicted, you can still be criminally prosecuted.
This is something that we asked ourselves about and we kind of speculated about. But when we talk about a war crime, we were saying before, that's something that is that could be adjudicated at the Hague court, et cetera, but it's not something it's not a pardonable offense in the sense of these other pardonable offenses that we've heard so much about.
Well, the U.S. is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. That's probably the most important aspect of this. There was actually a very good West Wing episode about this very issue involving Leo McGarry, the fictional vice president who had been a combat pilot in Vietnam. But under American law, I think there's a very clear civilian charge of murder here. With malice aforethought, bad intention, you meant to do a bad act, that's malice aforethought, and mens rea, criminal intent, so clearly apply if, in fact, Hegseth said, as we now know he did, kill them all. And why would you say kill them all? Well, the only reason you would do that is to make sure that there are no witnesses who can challenge your claim that this was a boat full of drugs. And by the way, if you go back and look carefully at the images from above, just before that first boat is hit, now I'm not an expert in imaging science, but it sure looks to me like a fishing boat. It's more an open sort of boat of the kind you can see people in various places around the world go out and fish in. And of course, that's the claim by some of the families who lost their sons, husbands, whomever on the boats, that they were out fishing at night.
Yeah. The sort of shallow nature of these shallow boats, it seemed to back up fishing.
And which certainly couldn't go 1,000 miles to reach the United States. By the way, according to the Drug Enforcement Administration, that is, according to Donald Trump's own administration, the share of fentanyl and fentanyl precursors being smuggled into the United States from Venezuela, zero. And total drugs brought into the United States illicitly, less than 1% from Venezuela. So while I always dislike the argument that, well, we're really inherently dislike the argument, we're really doing this for the oil. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. And given Trump's affinity for burning fossil fuels, in his case, you need to deeply wonder. Somebody said, we need to grab the oil. Because remember, Trump said in the Middle East, we should grab the oil.
Well, it's also worth noting, if they're so serious about this war on drugs, why pardon this president of, is it Honduras?
It's Honduras.
Yeah.
My late sister-in-law was an American diplomat. Her last post was Honduras. So she lived there for many years. We've been to Honduras a number of times. She died a number of years ago now. But the level of corruption in Honduras is off the chart. While we were there once, one of the local newspapers ran a huge double truck map on the inside. That's double truck has 2 pages facing each other, with Tegucigalpa, and marking which gangs were in which territories and telling about their particular criminal interests. And while we were there, there was a bus driver who had been robbed repeatedly by one of the gangs, and he told him, I don't have any more money. So they just, in front of all the passengers, killed him.
Wow.
We paid for a guy with a shotgun who stood in a booth 24 hours a day, different people, different shifts, but 24 hours a day. There was a guy with a shotgun on the street where my sister-in-law's hacienda was located. And this is a society where, why did we suddenly have, a few years ago, all of these people coming, notably mothers with daughters who went all the way from Honduras to the Mexican border, which is well over 1,000 miles, because we stopped putting financial aid into Honduras at the insistence of Donald Trump. And this made the criminal gangs much more powerful. And they began impressing 10, 12-year-old girls as soon as they began to get a figure into prostitution, impressing young men into becoming gang members. One of the 3 people who were on the personal staff of my sister-in-law to take care of her, which is very common in a country like that because very inexpensive to do. He got into some row with one of the gangs, and he committed suicide because he left a note saying that he knew that they would torture him to death in the most cruel ways possible, and they were going to get him. So he killed himself.
Wow.
Over something stupid, frankly. In the beginning of it. So this is the most dangerous city in the Western Hemisphere, Tegucigalpa.
Well, to this point, I mean, that this is, and that's such a disturbing story, but I'm glad that you described it, because it's not just narcotics trafficking, it's all of that stuff you're talking about. It's a real gruesome, brutal, ruthless gang that controls all of this. And so this, again, this Juan Orlando Hernandez, he's the Honduran president. He was just released from a U.S. federal prison. It just happened today because, and a lot of very capable and hardworking narcotics officers, DEA agents, and Justice Department lawyers actually prosecuted a case against this guy, and they charged him and convicted him of running this narco state and smuggling hundreds of tons of cocaine into the U.S.
400 tons, according to the indictment. Think about that. That's 400 times 2,000. And cocaine is sold by the gram, and there's 28 grams to an ounce. I mean, we're talking about an enormous amount of drugs. And Donald goes, oh, he was so unfairly prosecuted. I mean, they didn't have any case against him, They just said because he's the head of a... Holy mackerel. This is...
He got 45 years. I mean, it had to be...
He was lucky he didn't get life.
And so he's back out. And this, again, is of a type. This administration is doing this, and they did it last month with the Silk Road guy, and they do it with, I mean, these are people who are drenched in lawlessness and crime, and some of them are just really, as we've suggested, associated with narcotics and child trafficking. That's a Silk Road and an underworld, if you will. I don't get it aside from the money part, David? Is it just
Mark,
all about the money?
What is wrong with you? How do you not recognize that Mark Kelly is the criminal and that these drug traffickers are really poor, misunderstood people who the system has wrongly charged with crimes? We really need to deal with the serious criminals and their speech, because that's what's threatening MAGA and threatening America and real patriots.
Play me the Mark Kelly thing, will you, Tony, please? Mark Kelly speaking, and he's, again, had this profile elevated as a result of the Trump charges. First, this is a bit of a supercut on him. Go ahead.
In 1991, when Donald Trump was driving the Taj Mahal casino into bankruptcy, I was getting shot at over Iraq and Kuwait. In 2001, after Donald Trump said that the collapse of the Twin Towers meant he now owned the tallest skyscraper in Manhattan, I was carrying flags honoring 9/11 victims into space on a rocket ship. In 2003, when Donald Trump was writing birthday greetings to the monster Jeffrey Epstein, I was the first on the scene to recover the bodies of my fellow astronauts who died when Space Shuttle Columbia exploded during re-entry. In 2011, when Trump was hosting a reality show and peddling conspiracy theories against President Barack Obama, I was sitting next to my wife's hospital bed as she recovered from a gunshot wound to the head. My point is this: I've been through a lot worse in service to my country. The president and Pete Hegseth are not going to silence me. They aren't going to keep me from speaking out, and they're not going to keep me from doing my job. Enough of the bullying, enough of the intimidation, enough of the threats, enough of your nonsense. Doesn't help anyone in our country afford their groceries or pay their medical bills. And it erodes the rights of every American. My job is to fight for them, to stand up for the Constitution, and nothing is going to stop me from doing my job.
So he's speaking both righteously as an aggrieved, targeted party, but also you see him beginning a rise politically, I think, in a way he'd never dreamt of, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm in this odd position of covering politics when I spent my whole career covering policy and avoiding politics. I did one campaign in 1976, and that was for governor of Nevada for the LA Times, and that is not what I want to do. But I think at this point, it's pretty clear that either Gavin Newsom or Mark Kelly, maybe J.B. Pritzker, are the most likely candidates the Democratic Party will put up in the next round. And that's assuming that we do have elections, and I think we will, but it's not a guarantee anymore. As in the past, you could think the next election is equal in likelihood to the sun appearing to rise in the east in the morning. Ours in the West, we got a whole bigger problem. But yes, he's clearly testing out and feeling out a position here. And Trump's mental deterioration is clear and worsening. You got to work hard not to recognize there's a problem here. His striking out at people for asking questions, which is beneath the dignity, not just of the presidency of the United States, but the mayor of Smallville.
Sure.
And Kelly, not a physically attractive man by any stretch of the imagination, and relatively small. Astronauts usually are pretty small guys. He knows command presence, and that is something we know is appealing to voters. I'm sure he's seriously thinking now about running for the White House and finding out what kind of financial support he can raise. And of course, that goes to one of the tragedies of American life, which is that we have created this system where only those who are acceptable to the big campaign donors will even appear on the ballot in either party. So among the many duties that we, I believe, have as citizens, if and when we get through this, is some serious reworking of policies and things like publicly financed elections. And by the way, let me just make my pitch for that. The advantage of a publicly financed election and barring corporate money 100% from elections is you get a budget and we get to see how you handle the taxpayers' money. Are you a spendthrift? Are you prudent? Can you brag at the end, hey, I won the presidency and I'm giving the government back $5 million of that, whatever huge number was handed out. I mean, there are all sorts of things we could do to make the system less dependent on the interests of very wealthy people. That, by the way, everybody who's wealthy is not of a similar mind any more than everybody who's a carpenter is of a similar mind. We need to keep that in mind. Historically, Wall Street was more with Democrats than Republicans, for example. But these are really important issues. And by the way, Pete Hegseth should be very worried that after this administration is gone, he's going to be indicted. And because the charge will be murder, there is no statute of limitations, unlike many other crimes.
Well, more on Hegseth in a second. I just wanted to put a sharp point on what you are saying about elections. It's the saddest fact of America and American politics. The system is drenched in money, and there are interests on all sides that benefit from it being drenched in money. There are corporate interests that are served, there are private interests that are served, there are personal interests that are served along the way. So that's a huge mountain to climb. And of course, the Supreme Court made it so possible now with Citizens United and other court cases like it. I want to get now to Hegseth just for a second, because let me just go first to your point about murder. Now, is there any way that Trump could intervene there and make certain...
He can pardon Hegseth, and I fully expect that he will.
Right.
If he does that, here's the problem he's going to run into. There will then be enormous pressure to turn Hegseth over for a trial in The Hague, even though we are not parties to that convention. The Venezuelans will absolutely be demanding turning him over. And, you know, a new regime, if we in fact invade and throw Maduro out, may well find it in its interest to show the independence of the Venezuelan people. So I don't think this is a safe place for him at all. And I'm not one bit worried about him. You know, if you're going to do things like this, you should be held accountable. And that's a word we really need to get back into. I've talked about the word regard. We need to have a lot more regard for others, but we also need to have accountability. And one of the things I taught my law students when I was teaching the law of the ancient world was in the ancient world, accountability was often incredibly strict accountability, which is a technical legal term. So much so that in many cases, the penalty for not being properly accountable for misconduct, we killed you. At least that was what the law said, whether we carried it out or not. And we're seeing an administration here that wants no accountability whatsoever. And notice how often when Donald is confronted with something, his response to something he's done that's just beyond the pale is, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah. No,
and then he'll say something within a minute that makes it clear he knows all about that.
Yeah, his default position is, I know nothing about that. Right, I don't know anything about that.
Sergeant Schultz on whatever that Bob Crane show was.
Yeah, Hogan's Heroes, was that it? Yeah.
I know nothing.
No. So now to Russia and Ukraine, if you would. The plan that was handed down, it seems at best coached by Russia, the 28 provisions as part of this plan. At worst, it was more than coached by Russia, it was crafted by Russia. And then Witkoff, I'd suggest, who is a billionaire golfing buddy of Trump, who's handled all these negotiations in the Middle East and in Russia, Ukraine, has tremendous business interests in Russia. A lot of his capital for building that billionaire estate that he presides over comes from Russia. So the idea somehow that guy is squiring this Ukraine-Russia thing to a peace, it's absurd.
Well, I think what's going on here is very clear. The Russians, first of all, are absolutely behind this 28-point plan. And you can get in the details, say, well, some of it's from their stuff. You're missing the big picture if that's where you go. The Russians were behind this. Steve Witkoff coached the Russian emissaries on here's how to deal with Donald, here's how to appeal to him. I could run a class on that.
Sure.
Every time I ever negotiated with Donald, I came away better off than I thought I would be, because basically you just have to know how to flatter him the right way. And when he first sort of tests that, you have to continue down that road, and then he kind of collapses because he's so desperate inside for approval. But this is the way this is being sold to Trump, I think, is very clear at this point. It's a commercial transaction. There's money to be made. And that's because words like honor have no meaning to Donald. I mean, he'll say things now and then, but honor is a concept that's alien to who he is. It's not in his nature, it's not in his upbringing, and it's absolutely not in his conduct all the way back as far as I know about it, which includes things when he was a boy. So the thrust of this plan is, hey, we're going to make a lot of money. All we have to do is get the Ukrainians to give up the territory Russia has, plus a whole lot of other territory they haven't been able to get. And then we're going to make a lot of money. And of course, all that makes an assumption that you can trust Putin. Anybody at this point who thinks that Putin's word is worth a nickel, a plug nickel, is a fool. It's utterly worthless. And you know, I've said on this show a number of times, and I've seen some people criticize me for saying this, that Putin really intends to conquer other countries. Well, look what he's doing right now. Drone overflights of NATO countries, fighter jets intercepting NATO country aircraft, various forms of harassment. He absolutely is going to go through with what he himself has said through this entire century and in the very last year or two of the previous millennium, that he intends to do. And in that case, his conduct says we should take him at his word. He intends, and his successors support the idea that a mother Russia, a greater Russia should be there, that Ukraine is not a country. The old Soviet used to refer to Ukraine as the Ukraine as a way to diminish it and suggest it's just a part of Russia. And of course, the historical record suggests the exact opposite. If there's a mother country, it's Ukraine.
The latest is, and this just happened today, Zelensky is now going to Europe in the shadow of this, proposed agreement, which is kind of a surrender agreement, as you, I think, made the point last time we spoke. Yeah. And the Europeans, they're blanching from this as well, this agreement that's proposed, for the reasons that you've just suggested also, the expansion of Russia and how it's a crappy deal. The Americans, in other words, are now, it would seem, in league with the Russians. I'm sure this is the general European posture. And the Europeans could push back in many different ways, couldn't they, David?
They absolutely could. And in a perverse way, you got to admire the skill of the Kremlin in manipulating this situation. I mean, you really do. It is astonishing that we are at this point. The best thing that could happen right now is for the European Union countries to agree that they're going to turn over to Ukraine all of the seized assets of Russia. That is it doesn't involve any lethal force. It provides Ukraine with money to buy more weapons and to buy things it chooses to buy. It will enrage to no end Putin, and he may do something adventuresome and dangerous, but the whole situation is adventuresome and dangerous. And this continued, well, let's just take baby steps. Let's do the minimum we need to respond. It hasn't worked. I don't see why or how it would work. And so the Europeans need to step up, because they're the first line area that's going to be in trouble. I mean, imagine if Putin or his successor is successful. We'll go forward 20 years. He's rebuilt his military. The Iron Curtain is now back, basically. That's going to be just god-awful for Europeans for as long as that exists. And we managed to bring down the Soviet Union without any direct warfare. There were proxy wars like Vietnam, but no direct warfare, no nuclear holocaust, because we were smart about it. And unfortunately, we have an idiot in the White House. And I mean that in both meanings of idiot. The classic meaning from ancient Greece, that you don't care about anyone but yourself, which is the definition of being Donald Trump, and also the sense, in the modern sense, of you don't know anything. The Europeans got plenty of sophisticated, smart people here, and they should be figuring out how to ratchet up. They should be getting tougher on the sanctions on Russia because it's a one-note economy. And we know they can now get by without much Russian oil and gas, and probably after this winter can go whole hog and just cut them off completely.
They have options too to push back against America, or do you think they're loath to do that?
That's a really good question. Do you want to drive more of a wedge with Donald Trump when NATO has been the most important organization in the world in preventing the kind of violence that has swept Europe again and again and again for hundreds of years? That's a more subtle question. I haven't given a lot of thought to that, but you want to keep the United States in your corner. Keeping Trump is mostly a function of who talked to Donald last, and 5 minutes later he may change. I mean, the underlying basic problem is that we have a mentally ill, appallingly ignorant man in the White House who has these desperate emotional needs from his awful, awful upbringing. Be glad you were not brought up in that household. And the Europeans have to figure out how to navigate this. If J.D. Vance were in the White House, which may well happen before this term is out, he's probably a much more malleable individual because there's no indication he has any particular principles.
Right.
And he's basically an opportunist. Well, opportunists you can deal with. You have to understand the opportunities that will motivate them, and you can manipulate them.
Finally, I want to just go quickly to this National Guard situation. This happened since we spoke to you last, so I wanted to get your take on it. You know, the National Guard troops in Washington that I think shouldn't be there to begin with, of course, but they are. And they had opened fire on two of them, and as it turns out, it was an Afghani who had just been granted asylum and gained asylum in April during the Trump administration vetting process that presumably would have been on top of whatever vetting went on during the Biden administration. But to the point, he'd been heavily vetted by the CIA, worked with the CIA for some time. So this guy was, it seemed, vetted quite extensively. So more to the point, he had lost his work permit, David. That is to say, it had expired. And so he'd found himself with 5 kids at home in a sort of desperate situation, not so unlike many Americans find themselves as the economy continues not to serve them. And I don't know to what extent, but I'm guessing more than a little bit, in desperation, frustration, and anger, maybe it was a contributing factor in what happened. I wonder if you can give me a moment on all of this.
Well, first, let me step back to the Trump administration. How is the Trump administration like the dictatorship in North Korea and the dictatorship of the Taliban in Kabul? One person does something and we now punish everybody. We have corruption of blood that's in our Constitution, that phrase, corruption of blood, in North Korea. So there are people who are in effectively prisons in North Korea today because of something their great-grandfather did in 1949. And Trump says, oh, well, this person did this, so no Afghanis can come in the country, and we're going to return these people to Afghanistan. Well, God help us if we ever need to get somebody in another country to help us against a force like the Taliban, because you'd be an idiot to sign up for it unless you are confident that we've completely purged ourselves of Trumpism and the thinking of Trumpism. Secondly, the vetting here is the responsibility of the Trump administration and all their efforts to lay this on Biden. I don't know whether they'll go with the public or not, but they're the ones who approved. Third, we shouldn't be surprised that some people who we put to work basically as assassins. I mean, in his case, he wasn't pulling the trigger. He was picking the targets and saying, yes, that target, and here's the rationale for why, and persuading military lawyers, because this is a combat zone, that you can kill these people. That somebody like that may not, in the long run, be terribly mentally stable. I mean, when I was a boy growing up in California in the 50s and in the early 60s, I remember men, fathers of kids I knew who were just mean and nasty and would explode out of nowhere. And as a kid, I didn't understand it, but I now know it's because every single one of them I knew served in World War II. mostly in the Pacific, where they were in combat. And it messed them up. Finally, the system that we have for when we bring people here, and there are about 250,000 more Afghanis who we promised we would take care of, and we're not, waiting to get into this country. And Trump's just basically said, no, that's not going to happen.
And just to make that point, David, they helped the Americans at great personal peril.
Oh,
I mean, if you know,
absolutely. The Taliban killed a whole lot of people, and not only will they kill this man if he's sent back, but they'll kill his children. We have every reason to think that they will do that because they've done it in other cases. And so the system we have, and I fault Congress and the Democrats as well as Donald Trump and the Republicans on this one, we haven't set up a logical, thoughtful system. You know, Ronald Reagan, you know, looked at the immigration situation. He was from his 20s, a Los Angelino, and was governor of California, came to recognize that, you know, yeah, we depend for California agriculture and some other things, but agriculture primarily, on all of these workers who come from Mexico. And we have to come up with some logical system. And we have to recognize that a lot of people have come here with or without permission, or they have historical reasons for being here. And we've got to address this. And we did. We had what amounted to, for all practical purposes, an amnesty. And we resolved that. And there are people who came here from Mexico without permission when I was born, whose children now are, you know, retired, successful surgeons, business owners, restaurant owners, school teachers, police officers. And we're not doing that today. We're just demonizing people from somewhere else. So, you know, the core underlying problem has to do with our inability to find some kind of sensible policy to deal with immigration and people coming across borders and going around and arresting, you know, mothers who go to school to pick up their kids, or people who show up for a court hearing because they're compliant with the law, and dragging them away while their kids cry and scream, leaving a baby in the back seat of a car, which can be a prosecutable offense, is not the answer to this. And we're seeing more and more Americans recognizing, no, this is not the way to run a railroad.
Yeah, boy, very well put. Look, I'm way out of time, but real quick, Trump just announced, this is a pivot to this story I just wanted to get to, this Trump account, which he has floated now, which would be literally a way in which Americans could become millionaires by the time they're 28. It suggested essentially that you can fund this personally up to $5,000. The government will, if you're under 18, contribute $1,000, and your employer can contribute $2,500 annually, okay? So the idea is this pot of gold that you feed into will ride the stock market, and by the time you're 28, based on these projections, you could be sitting on $1 million. Now, again, this is on the White House website, Trump accounts, they call it, giving the next generation a chance to save. You can see it there. Tony's got it on the screen for you.
Yeah.
It strikes me as full of illegalities. I just don't know how you can compel employers to feed this fund, how you can just create this fund overnight. But then again, I didn't think DOJ would be able to dismantle the American government overnight. So tell me, David, what are the realities?
Yeah, Trump doesn't have any legal authority to do this, number one, and he's going to be challenged in court about it, number two. He, however, is going to get a lot of popular support among this, especially among the poorly educated. The underlying problem that Trump is addressing here is grossly inadequate incomes. If the minimum wage had kept pace with productivity, that is the value added by workers in the economy, instead of being $7.25 an hour since 2009, and by the way, if you're a wait staff person, a waiter, a bartender, a busboy, etc., it's $2.13 an hour, frozen since 1993, thanks to Bill Clinton. The minimum wage should be about $26 an hour. And if you raised it to $26 an hour, which is more than $1,000 a week, you would see everybody who is below executive pay, everybody up to probably $200,000 a year getting a pay raise. And you say, well, how would we afford that? Well, you need some time to adjust, but the Europeans afford that. McDonald's workers in Denmark famously get about $22 an hour plus healthcare, plus education benefits, et cetera, a pension, et cetera, et cetera. And their McDonald's burgers don't cost hardly any different than what's here in America. It's what happens is you're not going to have $1 billion a year, or in the case of Elon Musk, $1 trillion or $500 billion CEOs. That's what would be the difference. So this is going to resonate with people who simply don't have enough money. And the RAND study, which I've mentioned before, and I hope you put on your page, from 73 to 2018, if we had kept the income distribution of 1973, the peak year for private sector union membership, the average income of the bottom 99%, so that's up to roughly $600,000 a year, and that year about $500,000, would have been 2/3 higher. If you make $100,000, you would have made $167,000. Think how much better off you would be if you had an extra 2/3 on your paycheck. It would eliminate a lot of the social pathologies, a lot of the anger that we're seeing that's driving violence in this country, and appeal for Donald Trump. And all of this is Congress acting to suppress the wages of ordinary people. And never forget this, in his first campaign, and at least once in the second round of Donald Trump, he has said the problem is wages are too high.
Wow.
If you're a Trump believer and you think he's your friend, Donald says wages are too high. You could put together a bunch of clips for a supercut of him saying that. And it's not the problem. The problem is that too few have too much and too many have not enough.
Sure. And you've just outlined the fact that the real way to build wealth would have been to, as you suggest, keep wages growing. And
but
you'd have a
But
robust
this will allow
middle class.
Trump and the Republicans to say, see, the Democrats don't want you to be wealthy. They want to hold you down. No, that's not what's going on at all. By the way, if you also really want to increase wealth, there are two other things you can do. Break up the big monopolies so that we have competitive market capitalism. My trilogy on the American economy is it champions competitive market capitalism because I believe so far it's the best idea human beings have come up with. Somebody may come up with a better idea in the future. Great if that happens. But the essential word is competitive. We have corporate socialism. We don't have competitive market capitalism. And the second would be universal no out-of-pocket health care. I was listening to Jen White on NPR's 1A today, and she had these very erudite experts about our healthcare system and its economics. And they kept going with the existing assumption that your ability to get health care should be tied to your working. Why? Is your ability to drive down the road tied to that? As I ask my students every year, at some point, I find a way to bring up. So I got a question for you. How many of the vendors I see today, we're having a job fair and some other things on campus, and banks are here. And so how many of you were solicited for kindergarten insurance? They look at me like I'm crazy, and I go, you weren't solicited for, college students are known to engage in behaviors that create a need for kindergarten. Are you sure you weren't solicited for kindergarten? Oh, I forgot. We provide that at no charge to you personally because it's good for society to have kindergarten. Well, why do we treat healthcare differently than kindergarten?
Well, it's also a double penalty. If you lose your job, you lose your benefits, you lose your health care. It's a brutal, I think, withering weight on people.
And they had a doctor on today who said he'd had patients who had a treatable stage 1 cancer. They could have been cured and lived the rest of their life, or they needed a surgery that was scheduled and they lost their insurance. And he had to tell them, I'm sorry, you're going to die. He didn't say it as bluntly as I did, but it was clear that was the message. You don't have $98,000, you're going to die. This is inhumane. It's illogical. And, well, the Constitution as written does not create a right to health care. How could it have? We didn't have medically based, scientifically based health care until the last century, the 1900s. That doesn't mean we can't, to promote the general welfare, have a universal health care system which every other modern country has. Mexico has universal health care. That is
Thank
not
you. I was going to say, and it's
country.
also, we're the exception in the world, in the developed world.
Yeah, it is just absolutely bizarre, and it's cruel. And, as an editor when I was at the New York Times, said to me in much more coded language, I will never get health care. And that's because it would go not just to white people. And, as a practical matter, I think he's right about that. Racism is at the core of that. But if we had universal no out-of-pocket health care, we would turn fewer taxpayers into tax eaters because they become disabled and can't work. We would eliminate for small business owners their worries about the health status of their workers. Large companies would pay no more than they pay now because they pay through the tax system, and we would save an amount of money that in some years equals all the income taxes paid by everybody, and in most years, all the income taxes paid by 99% and a little bit of the top 1% of the public. As soon as I get through this semester and grading papers, because I'm carrying a much heavier load than usual, I will post a piece with the numbers on this, because I've gathered the numbers. I just haven't had time to write them.
Well, I'll look forward to that. I always feel, and I think I made this point to you before, that the insurance companies are the middlemen that you just don't need. And the problem with the ACA or the Obamacare was that sadly, the insurance companies had an oversized place at the table, and they continue to benefit. I get it. There's a market,
and it was
know.
all Obama could get through Congress, and
Exactly.
It's deeply flawed. And I wish he had the political strength to do more, but. Right now you're seeing the clear goal. Congressman Alan Grayson, a rather obnoxious character I know a little bit from Florida, said on the floor of the House maybe 20 years ago now, the Republican health care plan is very simple. If you get sick, die soon. And he was censured for that. But you know what? He spoke the God's truth.
Yeah, ain't it true? Wow, an overstuffed feast of a conversation with David Cay Johnston. Thank you, David. We'll talk next
week.
Take care,
Mark.
All right, my friend. David Cay Johnston, everybody. Right on.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
How would you handle this? We could try ignoring it, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at? Stay at home and get baked.
Right on. Thank you for being here. Please smash the like button. That's the thing. Costs you nothing to smash
it with your iron
do
rod.
it like a boss. And subscribe to the show and hit the notification bell. We had some great interviews drop over the long weekend, the Thanksgiving weekend, and I got a lot of great emails and comments about them. And you'll know whenever special interviews drop when you hit that notification bell. So there is all of that. Now, I am looking ahead in the hymnal and seeing that I have a few stories that I wanted to share with the boys and girls, Kim. I don't know if I should go to your news, knowing that they are integrated into said news, or if I should do them separately. And I turn to you as my light in the night to share your opinions, and so I ask you what to do, Kim.
Kim, how are you?
Let's do a quick news because it's not that long.
Quick news as we continue. Mark Thompson. No. Just a quick, thank you very much.
Mark Thompson Show.
On the Mark Thompson Show, I'm Kim McAllister. This report sponsored by CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. President Trump and Secretary of Defense or War, Pete Hegseth, are defending the strike allegedly targeting survivors of a suspected Venezuelan drug boat. Both were asked about the Washington Post report that Navy Admiral Frank Bradley directed a second strike to comply with Hegseth's order that no one be left alive. Hegseth said he didn't know the second strike involved two people, but he backs Bradley's decision. President Trump said the strikes were justified. Bradley reportedly going to brief lawmakers on the incident this week.
President Trump said the strikes are justified. President Trump can't even spell strikes. Give me a break. It's utterly absurd. I think the absurdity of these strikes has been laid bare by now. David Cay Johnston just spoke about it. I mean, look at those vessels that were hit. It's just absolute lunacy. It is a perversion of truth, and you're going to see more of it as this becomes more problematic for the administration.
The FBI is investigating an attempted firebombing at the federal building in downtown Los Angeles. KNBC television reporting firefighters were called to the federal building at about 8:30 yesterday morning, someone reportedly dropping off or throwing Molotov cocktail type devices near the front of the building. They did not ignite. The man accused of bringing the item detained. Federal criminal charges expected to be filed today. Authorities say they are investigating a possible connection between this incident and an arson fire at an apartment building in Koreatown earlier in the day. The apartment is reportedly the home of the man who was arrested at that federal building in Los Angeles. The Trump administration is planning to take a $150 million stake in a startup to advance semiconductor manufacturing. The Commerce Department, wait, isn't that communism? No? The Commerce...
Yeah. Well, more on that in a second. Go. You can tell me what they're doing, but you're right. Certainly.
Question.
Yeah.
The Commerce Department announcing it signed a non-binding preliminary letter of intent to provide federal incentives to Xlight under the Chips and Sciences Act in exchange for equity. So this company, Xlight, seeks to develop free electron lasers to improve the stage of chip production known as lithography that uses light to print patterns onto silicon wafers.
Tony was working on something like that for a while, weren't you, Tony, before you took your 8th job, which kind of derailed you. He and Dr. Emil Schopphausen.
Emil Schopphausen.
The third.
The equity stake in Xlight marks the administration's latest investment of its kind, as it has also taken stakes in Intel, U.S. Steel, and several critical mineral firms.
And Kim is right. It's a communist, if you want to think of it, move to take a controlling stake would truly be communism. Essentially the control of private industry by the state is communism. The control of the means of production, as it was written, in various Communist Manifesto, etc. But here you have a partial participation, and you may say to me, well, Mark, they're public-private partnerships all the time. Yeah, they take on a different kind of profile than the one you're seeing, and the reason you don't have this kind of thing, and you have so much of it under this administration, is because now you have a manipulation of the market and an interest in the marketplace that the U.S. government now can control. So you have a bizarre both incentivizing and ownership of this company and this capital in action, and you also have control of the marketplace by the U.S. government. I'm talking about in terms of regulatory policy, in terms of any number of things that the U.S. government does control. So it is hugely problematic. Now, offering governmental incentives, tax incentives, investment incentives, this is typically the way things are being done. But under this administration, it's, hey, we want a piece of the pie. And so that's happening here under the cover of the Chips and Science Act. So Chips and Science Act, and then you give us a piece of the pie, and that's where we end up with this $150 million stake in this startup.
Costco Wholesale suing the Trump administration over refunds on tariffs. The retail giant asking the Court of International Trade to consider all tariffs collected under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act unlawful. Costco wants a full refund of all duties under the act paid under the Trump executive order on reciprocal tariffs.
They may get it. I mean, we'll see how this. Look, David Katz, who will be in on Thursday, Katzadamus, in his prediction, he is saying, and for those who don't know, David Katz is a former federal prosecutor, one of the brilliant legal analysts in the English-speaking world. You see him all over BBC and, Australian TV and all this stuff. He believes that based on oral arguments, that the Supreme Court's general posture toward the tariffs has been a negative one, meaning they're not about it, and they may indeed rule against the legality of the tariffs, in which case the Trump administration, the existing government, will have to figure out a way to get all this money back to Costco and all the other businesses that have been harmed by these tariffs.
You know, when you pissed off Costco, you've really done it.
They're
That's
the
it.
head of the parade, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the sad part is that businesses have gone under because of the tariffs. Many businesses have gone under. Small businesses have gone under because of the tariffs. So the thing that the Supreme Court could have done is they could have stayed this entire thing or stopped these tariffs and said, we're going to rule on this, but we're going to enjoin or otherwise stop these tariffs from being imposed. These are taxes. We're going to stop these import taxes from being imposed until we rule. But that's not what they did. They said, we're going to rule on this. And as they say, their general posture based on oral argument seems kind of negative toward the whole thing. But the problem is that a lot of businesses are going under. And some of them are business. I think Forever 21, that business, they went under. And a well-known sporting goods chain, I think, went under because of tariffs. They're more than those. They're just the ones that are in mind. So I think if you actually look at the damage that tariffs has done beyond just making stuff more expensive, they've actually cost small business people their businesses.
Republicans are nervous about tonight's special House election in Tennessee. The race between Democrat Afton Bain and Republican Matt Van Epps unexpectedly turning into a tight race, according to the latest polls there. President Trump won the state's congressional district by 22 points in the 2024 election, but Republicans are putting millions into this race, and Trump has stepped up his campaigning for Van Epps. So we'll see how this all goes down today.
Yeah, it's a big one, certainly.
House Democrats launching an investigation now into FBI Director Kash Patel's use of the Bureau's jet. Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee are accusing him of having commandeered U.S. government aircraft for personal joyrides. FBI Director is required to travel with the Bureau's personal jet for security reasons, but Patel's travels have sparked scrutiny as he's been allegedly seen jetting to meet with his girlfriend, to attend sporting events, and to go on excursions. Congressman Jamie Raskin, who serves as the top Democrat on the panel, is now seeking all flight records, justifications for each passenger's travel, and any communications surrounding this flight.
I have a great little piece of Kash Patel news. That's a great picture of Kash Patel and his girlfriend, who's a singer. Thank you, Tony, if you found that, with the private jet in the background that Kash Patel jets around on. Kash Patel, before he went out to address the media, that's his favorite thing. He jumps on a flight and he'll address the media. And let me tell you how the FBI handled this, everybody. I'll tell you, I headed up the investigation myself, and it was no easy task. And really, his peacocking around FBI accomplishments is obnoxious. But the most notable part of his peacocking around the Charlie Kirk assassination was that he wouldn't get off the FBI plane until he was able to get one of those blue FBI jackets. He wanted to wear a blue FBI jacket to address the media. And they couldn't find a blue FBI jacket to give Kash Patel. And he said, I'm not getting off this plane until I get the jacket.
He threw a fit.
And so they got him a jacket. A female FBI officer had a jacket. They took her jacket and gave it to Patel, who then used it. And you can see him here in this picture that we have up. I think Patel, poser, incompetent, fits right in with the Hegsethian posers and incompetents who populate this administration.
Is that the lady that gave him the jacket? Now that's standing behind with the
she's jacketless, right? Those watching on YouTube, so at this FBI press conference, there's Patel up front with the FBI jacket, and then there is a woman right behind them, presumably an FBI agent, who has no jacket. I don't know if she is the one, but it's a very funny pic. Good grab, Tony.
Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Federal Vaccine Advisory Board, we say it's his because he handpicked all the people on the board, is considering a vote this week to stop vaccinating newborns for hepatitis B. Since the infant Hep B vaccine started in 1991, the dose at birth has led to a 99% decrease in Hep B infections in children and in teens. So we'll see what they do. The vaccine advisory board to meet on Thursday to vote on that. There is a candidate for Los Angeles City Council that is vowing to take up a new residence if he is elected. This is community organizer Raul Claros, and he's running against council member Eunice Hernandez. Claros says if elected, he will live in a trailer at MacArthur Park. The trailer would serve as his home and his office until the park is cleared out and cleaned up. He said he'd even hold meetings at the trailer in MacArthur Park. This area and surrounding streets have long been a focal point of the homelessness crisis in Los Angeles, leading to lots of reports of crime and drug use. He calls the area, which is part of Hernandez's district, a disaster zone.
Well, he's not wrong about that.
Yeah.
I mean, he better get a pretty, Tony can turn him on to some upscale trailers. I feel like, the world of trailers is a pretty wide and deep one. But that is MacArthur Park. We're showing you a picture of it, and it is definitely a collection of bad stuff. I mean, everything from, open drug use to, I think, violence, and it's a pretty brutal place, and it's right there in L.A., and you can, you want to go score any number of things that are illegal, from, fake IDs to meth. It can be done there.
So what happens when he puts a trailer in the park then? I mean,
they do all of that I just mentioned, but they just
right around
his trailer. Yeah,
do they damage and vandalize the trailer? I mean, is he putting himself at risk? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really good political thing to. I don't know the difference from a substantive standpoint.
Sure,
that it will actually make.
Billionaires Michael and Susan Dell are giving $6.25 billion to kids in an effort to inspire people to use the new Trump account investments for children. The U.S. Department of Treasury depositing $1,000 into investment accounts for kids born between January 1st of 2025 and December 31st of 2028. The Dell's gift, a little bit different. They will use the Trump account's infrastructure to give $250 to each qualified child under the age of 11. The Dells will put money into the accounts of children 10 and younger who live in zip codes with median family incomes of $150,000 or less, and who won't get the $1,000 seed money from the Treasury. So he's worth
the Dells. I mean, gotta say,
$148 billion is what he's got.
Wild, and that seems like some good walking around money. Anyway, so they're making this huge donation, though, is the point.
Huge donation, yeah. And lastly, Oxford English Dictionary's word of the year, rage bait. That's actually 2 words, but, they're
Maybe
counting
it's
it as
hyphenated.
one. Yeah. It's 2025's top word, defined as online content deliberately designed to elicit anger or outrage. Rage bait. The origins of the phrase or word date back more than 2 decades when it was first used in online discussion forums. But Oxford said its experts noticed the use of rage bait has evolved to signal a deeper shift in how we talk about attention, engagement, and ethics online.
I mean, it's a real thing, it's a real thing. So
this report sponsored by Coachella Valley Coffee.com. I've got my vanilla tea right beside me, so everything is right in the world. The holiday blend is on the website, CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. Look at that. They have gift sets. Yeah. So good. Please, if you go to the website to buy gifts for anyone or something for yourself, make sure you use the secret Mark Thompson Show code, Mark T, no spaces, at checkout. That'll save you 10% off at the end as you've got everything in your cart ready to go. Mark T at checkout, and it's CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. I'm Kim McAllister, and this is The Mark Thompson Show.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Acetaminophen.
This is Mark Thompson.
Yeah, right on, everybody. Hey, thank you for being with us today. What a great What a great crew we had in today. I mean, I just so excited to talk to Ray Madoff, and so excited, of course, to talk to David Cay Johnston, and excited that many of you jumped in. Among you, I see, I have to make this bigger. I can't see anything.
Predeterminator for 20 have been an 810 listener since 1978.
Wow.
Holy moly. I've heard all the greats. Mark and your team are my top 3.
Wow, that's pretty great.
Nice. Yeah.
Love that. Thank you, Predeterminator, for a $20 super chat. And I'm going to give you a big shout out.
Big shout out.
Man, that's a lot. And 810 is where we are a radio station that was on 810. That's why, that's the reference for those who don't know. A war on earth, says Richard Delamater. It will...
ill will to men.
Ill will to men. Oh, war on earth, ill will to men. Ho, 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 a-hole Trump.
He just wanted to make you say that. That's
What?
All right. I guess.
as opposed to
well
peace
done.
on earth, goodwill to men. Is that right? Okay.
That's the new chant for the holidays.
Yeah.
Louise says Trump accounts are the latest idiotic offering from the dude who brought Trump phones, airlines, university stakes, and other losers. Hashtag moron to go for this. Yeah, I wouldn't count on...
Big shout out.
Yeah, big shout out to Luis. I wouldn't count on this turning into big money for you. Luis also says IPA Pete's title needs to be changed again to Secretary of War Crimes. Oh, yeah. Murder at sea with no due process is still murder. And we talked about that with David Cay Johnston, and it's a pardonable offense, but nonetheless, it may happen. This is a war, says Greg Deckelman. This is a war about tantalum and niobium and not oil, rare minerals used in capacitors and not refined in the USA, but China. Am I reading this right?
No,
Yeah.
you got it. Mm-hmm.
And Tony knows a lot about this stuff, you know, the rare earth minerals and their use in so many of these different devices. And there really is, it is the contemporary, I would say, vein, gold vein that everyone is chasing, isn't it,
That's
Tony?
why
on
China
some
took
level?
over Africa.
Yeah, exactly. The Belt and Road Initiative pursued by China in Africa gave them a foothold and really did and does give them the upper hand in Africa and on the African continent in the search for that stuff. So thank you, Greg Deckelman. Chris Gay, thank you for a $10 super chat. Wow, it's super sticker, I
Big
guess
shout out.
Throwing us a 10, I appreciate it. I totally got hoed last night. So fun, says Richard Delamater. We had our holiday hoedown, and there was some hoeing and some downing. And Richard seemed involved in all of it. Fond memories of 810, says Harry Magna, with an $8.10 super chat. Thank you, guys.
Big
And
shout out.
to everybody came out last night. On David Cay Johnston, the first time I saw David, says a Bolsha boy, was a lecture on Trump in a bookshop broadcast on YouTube about 10 years ago.
Oh,
yeah. Wow. Well, he has had some of the great books on Trump, and The Making of Donald Trump is one of them. Those books really do, I'd say, well, David Cay Johnston's stuff dedicated to Trump, wall to wall, and Sarah Kendzior's stuff also describes the rise of Trump, the way that Trump was reconstituted by the media, the way Trump was in league with the Russians and the Russian mob for decades. So if you really want to read about that, I think Sarah and David really detail it so beautifully. So Trump and Keg's breath are throwing the Admiral under the bus over the war crimes, says Rev P, as the drug lord gets out of jail today on Trump's pardon. Yeah, that's just incredible. I mean, it is an incredible bit of hypocrisy that on the same day that you released this ex-Honduran president who was sentenced to 45 years in prison, Juan Orlando Hernandez, accused of flooding the United States with cocaine, not only accused, convicted of it. He gets out today while you pursue your war on drugs in Venezuela. It's absurd, absolutely absurd. And when you actually look to see what's behind the release of Hernandez, apparently Trump says there was a 4-page letter that was sent to him by Hernandez, casting himself as the victim of a political persecution by the Biden-Harris administration. I don't believe that Donald Trump read a 4-page letter. I don't believe he read a 1-page letter. Roger Stone said on his radio show that he had sent the letter and that Stone was taking credit for the fact that the guy was freed and had his sentence commuted. But it's, either way, it's despicable and incredible act of hypocrisy. So, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Someone did this to spoil our Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. I am excited about tomorrow's show. And I'm excited about the rest of the week. We have Rothman tomorrow. Mm-hmm. We have Liz Oyer coming in this week still. We have David Katz coming in. A lot of lawyers coming through who aren't afraid to speak their mind. Tony will break out the conversation with Ray Madoff and also with David Cay Johnston today and some of the things that we talked about before the guests arrive. We'll get that all going for you. Kim, anything else to add?
No, you're amazing.
Well, I love that. I need more of that. I need more. You're amazing. Yeah. Thanks again to everybody who joined us last night for the holiday hoedown. It was a lot of fun. We'll try to do more of it in the year ahead. And until tomorrow and the After Party Live, Shadow.
I'm Shadow Stevens for The Mark Johnson Show. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Until tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Auto time. Bye-bye.